I've got to do this bit first to tell you who Kallidus is and why we're here. And for me, this is actually quite important in terms of how I ended up doing this presentation and what I'm talking about, which brings me to my first point about I saw the topic when I came in here, which was about something to do with using automation to drive business growth. I think my marketing department has taken a little bit of something I said and made that the topic, which isn't quite what I'm talking about, but I'll try and bring that in a little bit and explain why I'm talking about what I'm talking. So Kallidus does a kind of a suite of talent management software. The bit I'm responsible for is called Kallidus Recruit. Now, Kallidus Recruit actually was originally a different company called Advorto, which some people may have heard of. We had a pretty good name in the market. Kallidus didn't used to do applicant tracking systems, but then bought us. So for me, it's been a bit of a journey from how we used to do things at Advorto to how the Kallidus way of doing things. So Kallidus are basically a company that really focus on UX. I mean, they do everything they do to try and make users' lives easier. So I'm just going to kind of whiz through a few of these introduction slides first. I'm not going to kind of go into too much detail. But we basically, in terms of the recruitment system, we try to make it as easy as possible to hire people quicker, faster, all the usual things that ATS does. And we've got a pretty good track record going back 10, 12 years with Advorto. So I've been with Advorto I was with Advorto for about 10 years and then joined Kallidus. So I've got 12 years experience in implementing systems for a really wide variety of clients, from the very largest, so I kind of was main consultant implementing for Lloyds Banking Group, to very small ones, and I'm sure everything in between as well. So I've implemented must be maybe up to 200 systems for different clients. I've got lots of experience of the problems you face, how you go about kind of using systems to address your challenges and so on. So kind of what I wanted to talk about is my journey in terms of looking at what I've learned about UX at Kallidus, and then thinking about how you might apply some of that same thinking to the whole recruitment process in terms of making it more efficient, getting more of the right candidates, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of, what would you do differently if you thought the way we think? And that kind of thing. And I'm going to use a few ideas and suggestions. And at the very end, I thought it would be useful for me to, I don't know how many of you are even thinking about doing an implementation or the very kind of first implementation or changing your system, but I've done hundreds of these things, and I'd like to kind of tell you some of the pitfalls and what to do to make sure your implementation is as successful as possible, and about getting the most out of your relationship with your supplier and planning for change. Because what a lot of people think is they implement a system and that's it, it's the end. For me and for us, that's always the beginning. And unless you invest in that relationship and invest in your system, it's going to very quickly fall into disrepair and end up not being loved. So I think it's a talk about that a little bit as well. So first, I thought I'd just talk about UX and what UX means and what it means to us. So I've got a really simple example here. Now, for me, this was interesting because this is just, we were looking at our candidate portal and updating the UX to be as good as possible. So I'm using one very small aspect of this to just demonstrate kind of decisions and thinking that we go through. So here I've got an email field, which if you didn't type something in a box, you end up with a thing underneath that says required. Now, is that the right way to do things? So that's kind of option one. Would you put it above the field? Why would you put it above the field? What would somebody actually do if it was above or below the field? What about if you actually said, please enter your email below the field or above the field? And it goes a long way beyond this. So what about the validation to the right of the field? What about accessibility? What if you kind of, you can't see red? There's so many things that come into such a simple question that you wouldn't believe it. But what we kind of try and do is actually test this with real people. And you go out and you see what people do, see where they click, and work out what really is the best way to do things. So that's kind of the way we think. So just out of interest, I kind of put 4 options up there. What would you think was the preferred way of doing things in terms of those 4 examples? So I put a hands up for 1, hands up for 2. Okay, we've got a 2. Hands up for 3. Okay, and hands up for 4. Okay, so most of you instinctively kind of know 4 was the correct way. And the key reason for this is for somebody who's got a screen reader, for example, they can see the problem with the field before the actual field. And that's quite important for people who are using screen readers. So that's, again, I wanted to kind of draw that thought process out just to think, what if you started thinking about your recruiting process with that level of detail, what would you do differently? So the point about UX, it's not just its user experience. It's not just what something looks like. It's how something feels, and it puts the user at the very heart of all the decisions you make about everything you do. So when I'm thinking user here, for you guys, I'm thinking candidates. So if you put the candidate at the heart of all those decisions, what would you do? It's useful, it's easy to use, it adds value, and it shapes a positive brand experience. So that's all, again, in terms of applying to the recruitment process and your recruitment advertising. Everything you do shapes that employer brand. And the main point here is it's really rigorously tested and it's refined with impartial input from real people. So we don't just kind of guess things. And I've kind of I mentioned that this topic of this conversation is a little bit different from what it said on the book. And I think that's because this happened. So this is, that I was asked, what did I want to talk about? The marketing department asked me to write a synopsis. So I write a synopsis, and it's kind of, if you think about how to build a system and you go on gut reactions and what somebody said or what the client wanted, it's kind of, you end up with different shapes of different things for different people. So, is UX important? So it is important, and it's actually, if looking at some recent research by Fosway, it's the key reason why people are looking to change systems or buy systems these days. And there's a number of other kind of things, but quality of the user-end experience is absolutely at the top. Now, this is kind of a growing trend towards candidates and users of systems wanting a true consumer-grade kind of system to do things. So it's like that everybody's used to apps on their smartphones, and not many people kind of yet think of that way or are doing things that way. So this is the question I was asking. What would you do differently if you applied this same thinking to your recruitment process? So the point is, most of your users are candidates. So there's this growing trend towards bad UX not being tolerated by candidates and people losing candidates at the front end of the process because the candidates kind of go, oh, I don't understand this, or oh, it's rubbish, and they kind of you just lose good candidates at the very end of the process. So I was thinking, what would you do to job adverts to make them truly engaging? What could you do? And I'm sure there's other sessions on this kind of thing today as well. So I'm thinking, like, what would I want to know as a candidate in order to know whether I wanted to work for a company? So it's things like, I think video is really powerful here. I'd like to know who I'll be working with. What's a day in the life like at the company? And that kind of thing. It's not just a page of text and a job advert. I think it needs to go further. So you have to excuse me for that. I'm kind of going for a little bit of just thought leadership here in terms of what people could really do differently if they were thinking in a UX way. And I might say some controversial things as well, which people might not agree with. Your advertising strategy. Think differently about that. Are you just going to the same old job board, doing the same old thing because that's what you've always done? Are you really getting to the people, the right kind of people in the right kind of places to actually engage with the people that you're looking for? So that might be more intelligent use of kind of Facebook targeting to certain demographics and that kind of thing. What do candidates really want to know? I don't know. It will depend from job to job. So it's really about not just doing what you've always done, and think about what the candidate actually really wants to know about your business, about that job. Improving retention. So if candidates join the company and they get exactly what they expect, they'll stay there. I've got a good example of this for one of our clients, Iceland, who did exactly something along these reasons, to help retention because they had a problem using video. And what might you do differently if you treated every aspect of your recruitment process with the same level of scrutiny that we kind of think about UX? It's really just kind of thinking about those things. So I've got a few examples from clients here where they've done something a little bit different. So Iceland had a challenge where they were getting home delivery drivers, getting plenty of people in the door, but they weren't staying at Iceland. So they actually did a little bit of research into why that was. And it turned out that the expectations of those people being hired didn't quite meet the realities of the job. There was a lot more customer interaction than they were expecting, for example, even though they were just drivers. So what we ended up doing is we actually incorporated a video, kind of a day in the life video, into the application form, which only appeared for people applying to this job. Then they'd asked a couple of questions just to confirm that they'd seen this video. And then they carried on the application process. So it actually really brought to life what it was like to work in that job. Now, obviously, the result of that is still, this is a relatively recent change going back a few months, but Iceland are already seeing better retention in their home delivery driver hiring. And that's exactly the kind of way I'm thinking. It's like, if you thought about the candidate, what would you do? This is an example of something that you might do. This is one from one of our partners in Hong Kong, where they were having a real challenge actually finding enough people for a campaign to recruit flight attendants for Cathay Pacific. And what they did, so this is they're more of the kind of work as an RPO. They kind of thought, right, what skills and values are we actually looking for here? So forget kind of where we're advertising. Where can we find people that have these same skills? And what they kind of identified, having done a bit of kind of thinking about it, was people working for fast food chains worked in a totally different environment, but the skills and the values were the same. So in terms of they have to adhere to a rigorous sets of rules and kind of hygiene and so on, customer service. So what they ended up doing is focus their advertising campaign on people already working at fast food stores, fast food chains like McDonald's and so on. And that totally turned the campaign around. So again, it's about kind of thinking a little bit outside the box and pointing in a different direction. Last one, so that I was highly involved in this project. We've worked with Lloyds for, as also for, I think, going on 10 years or so. But they had an extremely complicated requirement with umpteen different recruitment workflows. And they kind of, despite all these different workflows, they needed to be very rigorous in their kind of, in terms of regulation perspective, in terms of doing the relevant checks and so on. And originally, they were finding they were losing candidates during that whole process of doing the referencing and the checking and so on, because candidates didn't know where they were in the process, things they didn't know what was going on. So we kind of delivered a lot more visibility to both the candidates and to the hiring managers of what was going on in that process. And again, the result of that there was much more engagement throughout that process, and candidates kind of joined and less dropped out of the workflow. So I'm going to kind of get on to how you might then use technology to support some of these kind of ideas. So some of it, I might say some controversial stuff here. So there's lots of industry noise about AI, machine learning and chatbots. Now, I've looked at this a lot because we're obviously thinking about incorporating this in various ways and already have in some places in terms of the product. But the fundamental question I ask is it ready? So I don't know how many of you have experienced the chatbot experience where you just want to talk to somebody and it keeps kind of coming back with absolute rubbish and you said, no, that's not what I was asking. Give me somebody to talk to, and it's really hard. I think there's lots of ways which AI isn't yet ready for recruitment. I think there's some ways it is working. So I'm thinking things like there's a company out there called ClickIQ who are very good in terms of programmatically working out the best places to do pay-per-click advertising to get you the best value for money and the best candidates. But there's lots of areas I don't think it's working, and I don't think it's ready. The likes of, if you're looking for like intelligent CV searching, suggesting candidates based on a job advert kind of automatically, that tends to be based on keyword searching. It misses loads of really good people and gives you loads of things that aren't relevant because they once did a job 10 years ago that mentioned that keyword. There's so much work that needs to be happening before that kind of stuff's ready. So the point I'm making is don't use technology for the sake of it. Think about the candidate. What's really going to benefit the candidate in terms of your use of technology? So that's where I might kind of be dipping into what the topic of this conversation was about. So in terms of automation, you can make things simple for the candidate by automating some of the key aspects of the process, such as getting them to do an online test. When an online test result comes back, give them immediate feedback, that kind of thing. When a manager does some screening, ask the manager to say why they're rejecting them or why they're proceeding them, and give feedback to the candidates. Right, so constantly give feedback to the candidate in terms of throughout the process. Try something different with job adverts, make them a bit more interactive, incorporate video, and I said kind of meet the team. I think that's something I would really like to see when I was joining a company, is immediately seeing who I'd be working with, what are they like, would I fit into that team, what are their personalities, maybe even do some crazy personality map and say, we're looking for somebody of this shape. I don't know, just kind of thinking. And the most important thing is, I think we should be using technology to encourage conversations with real people, not to avoid them. I think there's lots of talk in this industry with AI and what have you to kind of skip out the human aspect of it. And I think that's really important. I think what we should be doing is using technology to engage people earlier and actually have conversations. So various ways you could do that. So I'm thinking of something that, a chat bot, for example, if you catch somebody browsing your website, looking at certain jobs, maybe use a chat bot to go, oh, we've noticed you've been looking at these kind of jobs. But the aim of the chatbot is to immediately connect that candidate with the hiring manager or a recruiter in that area, say. So it's all about just trying to initiate that human conversation as opposed to do some sort of automated thing, oh, by the way, sign up for job alerts. I think it needs to be more than that. Which kind of brings me on to the next point, which is about the best conversations that you'll have are the timely ones. So I think you should be investing in sourcing and CRM and know your candidates. So when you pick up that phone, you kind of know what they're interested in, you know about them. You know that they're currently looking for a job, or they're kind of just moved to a job but might be looking in the future. But you can have meaningful, relevant conversations. Make sure everything works on mobile devices. And with everything you try, in the same way that we do with UX, kind of doing testing, measure it, get feedback. So try the same vacancy or similar vacancy and try 2 different things and see what works best, and then constantly evolve. So I'm thinking like that you might do for, thinking of one of our NHS clients. So they did a little bit of looking into how best to get people to come to an interview. So what they typically do in the NHS was they do kind of self-scheduling. They send out things, they go and pick your slot. Everybody would kind of pick a slot, and then half the people just wouldn't turn up. So why was that? And what they found is that it was as simple as a phone call. Making a phone call a few days before the interview, saying, oh, by the way, you're coming along to this interview, massively changed in terms of numbers of people that came to the interviews. So again, it's about that human contact. It's about not using technology for the sake of it. It's about refining your process to see what actually really does work best. Make sense? So I said I'd talk a little bit about implementations as well. So I've just kind of picked out a few things that I think help people who are implementing systems such as ours or any system. The first thing is up front. So this doesn't even need to be done with the supplier. It's about doing your homework, knowing where you are now, working out the areas of greatest impact, and actually having a proper dedicated client-side project manager. I've had lots of implementations where there hasn't been a project manager, and it's just never goes as smoothly as when the client has their own dedicated person. By the areas of greatest impacts, I mean know how long your process takes. You'd be surprised how many people don't know this up front, and therefore you don't even know it's after you've implemented the system, was it a success or not? But if you know how long things are taking, you can say, right, this is taking this long, we need to improve that bit very specifically. You can focus on the areas where the recruitment team are wasting the most amount of time to really help them zero in and automate the things you need to automate with the greatest impact. In terms of actually designing it, I'd always say start simple. There's lots of times I've had implementations where people want absolutely everything in it. They want a million different workflows. And it just makes things more complicated in terms of going live, more things for people to learn. If you start simple and then evolve, you can work out what works and what doesn't work and kind of grow in the right direction rather than having 5 things that are totally in the wrong direction and a few things that are in the right direction. Think about the candidates in terms of all of this and involve other teams early. So I'm thinking about
the amount of times somebody says, we've got this 10-page application form, and we kind of go, are you sure you want that? Yes, definitely, we've always done that. Think about the candidates and think, what can you do to get them the information you need with a minimal amount of effort from the candidates? And that's, I think, really kind of a key thing you can do in the design. In terms of the actual build and UAT side of things, so I'm amazed at how many clients who implement systems, they don't give their people enough time to actually work on the project. They're still doing their day jobs, and I appreciate that has to happen, but there needs to be, people need to be given time to focus on this and actually do UAT. I've seen systems go live where clearly some really fundamental testing hasn't happened, and then it's somehow our fault. Anyway, so I'd say reduce other commitments and try to get things done on time. So like all companies, we kind of have slots for these builds. So if somebody doesn't give us those images for their career site on time, it might mean we can't put them on and the project gets shifted back, or we might have to skip a week because we've got something else to do. Try and stick to deadlines. It sounds so simple, but actually, if we say we need this by this date, try and do that. It's really, really kind of helps us. And in terms of actually going live, the last few things I've talked about is we've had projects where the training's happened like ages before it goes live, and then everybody's totally forgotten about how to use it when it does go live. So I'd say try and keep the training and the go live kind of relatively close together. Think about the go live point being only the beginning. So this is where I was saying expect and budget for changes and invest in your supplier and your supplier relationship, and think about every year you're going to spend X on the system to keep evolving it, and you're going to spend this much time and this much resource to keep kind of the system current. I think you'll get much more value out of your supplier and out of your system if you think in that way. So that's kind of a little bit about implementation. Thanks for listening. I hope some of that was useful. Do you have any questions for me?